Hi, I'm Tracy Bevington. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and the owner and founder of a group therapy practice called Pacific Marriage and Family Therapy Network. We have three offices in Southern California, Sherman Oaks, Manhattan Beach, and Santa Monica, and we have 16 therapists that can help you. For today's Facebook Live, I'm going to be discussing being in a successful long-term relationship as it and as sex and intimacy are involved in making that happen. If you're joining us for the first time, please make a comment in the comment section. Let me know where you're joining us from and if you have any questions, comments, anything at all that comes up. If there are other topics that you'd like me to discuss in a future Facebook Live, I'm happy to address those as well. You'll see at the top of the page, there's a link where you can sign up for our newsletter or contact us. If you're joining us for the first time, please be sure to check your volume, make sure that your sound is turned on. Sometimes it defaults to like a transcription, so just check your volume. Thank you. Okay, now let's start talking about sex and intimacy. So sex and intimacy sometimes get connected as like the same thing, and sometimes they're described as something very different. There are a lot of different opinions out there, and it really just kind of depends on your definition at the time, because they can be relatively interchangeable. For the sake of what I'm going to be discussing today, I'd like to define intimacy as emotional connection. It is a way of attachment, being attached to another person. It is being open and vulnerable. It's also feeling relaxed in a relationship, safe in a relationship. Intimacy also has to do with the bonding that you have, which is it's that connection. Are you bonded? And also intimacy kind of goes along with being okay, being 100% honest with someone else and expecting that to be reciprocated. So intimacy is kind of complicated. There are a lot of different levels of it. Sometimes people are better at being intimate than others, and that's because it's really hard to be intimate. To be open and vulnerable is challenging, especially if we have a history of some kind of tough childhood or difficult upbringing where we didn't get nurtured in a way that made us feel safe and okay being vulnerable. So our go-to may be to close off and not be as intimate with people. I hear a lot of times on television or in movies where a therapist will tell their client, I think you have intimacy issues. It's actually pretty common. But what we're talking about is how we, to be intimate, need to feel safe, emotionally safe, physically safe. We want to be able to be vulnerable. So when we talk about sex, that is really, at least for the sake of today's presentation, I think of it as physical pleasure and physical connection. So sex is it's the physical part of being intimate. The most intimate act that any two people can engage in is having sex or intercourse. There's nothing more vulnerable for a person than to be naked with another person. It can be pretty scary, especially if it's your first time, because there is something about having nothing protecting us that makes us feel a little bit scared. Now, when we're talking about being in a long-term relationship and a successful long-term relationship, intimacy and sex are really important. Intimacy and sex is probably one of the key indicators for a successful relationship. It's really difficult to find a relationship that's going really well if there is not regular sex and constant intimacy. Well, I don't know about constant, but a lot of intimacy. They're related. The more intimacy you have, typically, the more sex there is in a relationship. Because the act of being sexual is a very vulnerable position to be in. So if you don't have the intimacy right there, nicely connected and bonded, sometimes sex just doesn't happen. Or you have bad sex, and that's no good either. If you're having challenges with getting enough sex in your relationship, I hear that a lot. It's really important to focus on intimacy. And I know this sounds kind of sexist, but women, just the way that our brains are put together, we have a need for a lot of intimacy in order to feel sexual. So when you are in a long-term relationship and you want more sex, we have to ramp up the intimacy. And sometimes that means connecting in a positive way, like giving hugs out of nowhere, giving a really nice, passionate kiss, not just a hi, peck on the cheek. Maybe it's practicing being more open and honest with each other, talking about things that might be kind of tough to talk about, but they're getting in the way of intimacy. It's also important to focus on intimacy, to recognize each other for something positive that you're doing. People love to be recognized for good jobs. It's really easy to point out when we're doing things wrong. It's not always so easy to point out when we're doing it right. We just kind of assume, oh, they know because I'm not yelling at them. Or, oh, they know because I seem happy about it. But it's one thing to validate it by saying, gosh, thanks for doing that. Or I really appreciate you considering what I desire or what I want. So think about recognizing each other for something positive. You can also focus on being vulnerable, which, again, I said a million times, it can be hard. Being vulnerable, oftentimes the easiest way to be more vulnerable is to avoid being angry. Because if you are vulnerable, you're going to be open and you're going to be in a place that is safe. So if you're angry, that means you're not in that vulnerable position. Anger is a very defensive position. It's like, stay away from me, I'm mad. So try to focus on being vulnerable or really focus on reducing the anger. There is the bottom line for intimacy, that is, you must feel safe and vulnerable to be intimate. So just think about, how can I interact with my partner in a way that will increase or improve intimacy? And how can I be more vulnerable, open, honest, positive? It sounds kind of silly, but these things really work. Sometimes having a plan can be very helpful. What I mean is having a plan on when you're going to be having sex, when or how. So what day, what time. Maybe it's more about like when is not a good time or when is not a good day. Also, does sex have to be intercourse? Maybe it's not. Being sexual doesn't necessarily have to be two people naked in bed having intercourse. Sometimes there are alternatives. There's oral sex, there's manual sex, there are all kinds of different alternatives. So maybe part of your plan is discussing what are some of the alternatives. If I or my partner is not in the mood to have intercourse, can we satisfy our sexual needs in a different way? This is something you're going to need to talk to your partner about. Consider alternatives, but you also need to be conscious and aware of what your partner's boundaries are. So let's say my partner really would appreciate oral sex. And let's say for some reason, I'm not okay with that. That might not be an option, but maybe there are other options. So explore, communicate, try to be open and vulnerable. And that will improve your intimacy. And oftentimes, I don't make any guarantees, but oftentimes that will also improve the amount of sex that you're having in your relationship. Once you get this down and you are really focused on building intimacy, being open, being vulnerable, connecting, attaching, bonding, being kind to each other, saying positive things, it's not that hard, and you can enjoy a happier sex life and feel more intimate and close to your partner in relationship. This is one thing for sure, that if you want a successful and long-lasting relationship, focus on intimacy and have a lot of great sex. So once again, my name's Tracy Bevington. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and the owner and founder of Pacific Marriage and Family Therapy Network. I'm here discussing sex and intimacy in a long-term successful relationship. Next week, Facebook Live will not be happening because it's 4th of July. But the week after that, we will be having our next part in long-term successful relationships. And I'll be talking about conflict, or maybe conflict resolution, how to manage conflict successfully in a relationship. If you have any questions or comments, please be sure to list them. And if there are any topics that you would like me to address, please also put them in the comments. I would love to address whatever it is that's on your mind. Thank you very much, and I'll see you not next week, but the week after, Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific. Thank you.